Hey, everybody. Are you with me when I say life can be amazing at times, but it can also be extremely challenging? I know I've been there myself, learned some valuable life lessons along the way, and now I'm here to help you. It's no coincidence you found your way to the Relevate podcast. I'm your host, Rena Olson, a self-proclaimed inspirer of others. Together, we're going to dive deep into raw and honest conversations with real people. My hope is that through these stories, you too will be inspired and ready to tackle whatever's holding you back or breaking your heart. Then you'll be free to live a life of purpose and true fulfillment. I promise it's possible. Let's Relevate. Hello, and welcome to the Relevate podcast. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed and listening to what I feel are these life-changing conversations. If you haven't had a chance, please take time to leave a review to wherever you listen to your podcast and share to your social media networks. It really helps people find us. Now, on to today's Relevate episode. My guest is Jim Shambo, and per his suggestion, we are calling this episode Unmasked. By all appearances, he and his beautiful wife, Terry, were living a Ken and Barbie life. Two beautiful people with two beautiful children living the dream with a big house, successful careers, until the facade began to crack and the mask started to come off. I know you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I did. For context, Jim mentions No Longer Bound in this episode, the men's addiction treatment center where he and I met, which had and continues to have a profound impact on his family's life, even though Jim's personal struggle was not with addiction. Let's get this conversation started. Jim Shambo, welcome to the Relevate podcast.
Thank you.
So glad you're here.
I'm glad I'm here.
I feel really so blessed to have met so many amazing people, yourself included, while working in the addiction and recovery field. I know a little bit about your personal story, but would love to know more.
I'd love to share it.
Thank you.
So the reason I'm here today is really to kind of share my story. It's one been building for many years. And I think it began at an early age, like most of us, right?
Yeah.
I grew up in a Christian family. My mom and dad were solid Christians, and they got married early on. And they were young. And later on in years, my dad began to struggle with his addiction as well. And that was hard. I knew that they loved me very much, but I also know that that was a real struggle. And it became an issue because in addiction, as families, we tend to walk on eggshells all the time and not real sure what to expect and when to expect it. Yeah. But I think that the pivotal moment in my life was about the age of 7, and someone outside of our family was sexually molested. And that was a point in my life that I feel I had an identity crisis that began to really grow. And I want to focus more today on, while those things began to build a mask, what happened as the mask became to come off, right? So over a period of time, living in a household with addiction became rough for me. And I began to question who I was. The sexual abuse certainly attributed to that in a big way. Yeah. And I also began to question God. And, we were brought up in the church. So every Sunday you go to church and you sit in the pews and you go to your small group and everybody is having a great time. And I really didn't understand why God would allow this to happen to me. And so many of us go through stories where we question that. Yeah. But more importantly, my worth and the shame that I had around that event really destroyed me. And so over a period of time, I met my wife, in my late teens, and we started dating. And I felt like at the age of 22 is when we got married. But walking into that marriage, I carried this incredible secret that I really didn't want to share and didn't really want to talk about. As well as the pain of watching my dad go through his addiction. Yeah. And he decided to get clean probably a couple of years before I got married. But again, that was a process. And the day that I got married was a time when I wouldn't say that our relationship was the best, but it was starting to heal. Yeah. And today, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a little bit, I have a great relationship with my dad, and I love him more than ever. So, but again, at 22, I got married, and it was the best day of my life. It was kind of a new thing to me, like to think that there's somebody that really loves me, and that I can share life with and experience it. And it was almost like being able to turn away from the past and from those things that haunted me for so long and move forward. But strangely enough, I had not dealt with those things yet. Yeah. So again, years and years went by, and I think that I got involved like most people and most men in performing. And so that mask began to build.
Yeah. Did you have any addiction struggles when you were younger? Did you try to self-medicate?
No. I mean, I experimented with drugs when I was a kid. I didn't like the feeling of it. I didn't like how it made me feel. But I think that most of us struggle with some sort of addiction, right? It's our thing that we go to. Right. And I think mine became work. It became titles. It became material things. And I became good at it. And I felt that over a period of time that was where my worth came from. And so it was much easier for me to really get behind being the president of the company or being the director of whatever. And so I got caught up in that. And I remember honestly feeling guilty a lot of times because maybe I achieved this or I achieved that, or I was driving that car or had that house, but it was really just masking all the pain that I had had. Yeah. And it just continued to bubble up.
And the pursuit of things is always so temporary.
Sure.
The satisfaction.
It sure it is. I mean,
it's fun to get stuff, but
it makes you happy, right? See, there's a difference between happiness and joy, right? Yeah. So the happiness is short-lived, and the joy is what we want,
right?
And that's what I was kind of missing out on. And while things seemed to be going, and from the outside, what people told me and what they saw. I mean, remember when we got married, people used to refer to me and my wife as Ken and Barbie, which was really kind of intimidating at the time. But everybody thought I was perfect, and that's totally not how it really was.
Nobody is.
And so, we started our life, and we had a couple kids, and my son's name is Tyler. My daughter is Courtney, and I love them dearly. And not knowing what God had in store, but 13 years ago in Fort Lauderdale, and having the title of this job, and it was great. But I remember my son was in his addiction. And I remember vividly going to a restaurant and having dinner with some business partners and coming out and waiting for the valet, and turned my head, and I saw my son, who I had at that point, I think, kicked him out of the house at the age of 16. And he was, I'm sure he was doing a drug deal or something where he shouldn't have, but said hello to him. And he turned and, kind of cursed, and it happened in front of so many people. And I just wasn't sure how to handle it. And I loved him so much, that it really messed with me. And my mask was starting to disintegrate at that point. You know what I mean? So that was the beginning of part of it starting to disintegrate. Yeah. And then we moved to Georgia after that. So about 10 years ago, we moved here to Atlanta.
Whew. So how long had it been since you had seen Tyler?
At that time, it had been a few months. I mean, we stayed in touch and things like that, just to make sure he was okay. You know, as parents of someone who struggles with addiction, I mean, it impacts the whole family. Yeah. I mean, certainly caused problems between me and my wife, and we were on different pages, sometimes different libraries, and just trying to figure out how we were going to get through this. And another thing too is we experience things differently, within a marriage. So, oftentimes her way may be to want to talk it out or to be upset, and my way was just to bury myself in my work and not have to think about it. And I remember oftentimes she would think, well, you just don't care about our son. And I really did. Yeah. I just didn't know how to express that or deal with that. And that was, probably going all the way back to my early childhood years to realize I just didn't know how to deal with the pain because I didn't know how to process it. So
being that turtle and going in your shell where you're safe and don't have to deal with it.
Yeah. So, we moved here, I believe in 07 or 08 to Atlanta. And I came here to work for a large insurance company and become an agent. And pretty exciting time, right? We got here and my son followed us up. My daughter came as well. And really exciting time for us. But again, that mask was there and I didn't realize what was getting ready to happen. And we had been here about 3 months and I started my career and we had to present a business plan. And in that business plan, I remember we had to do so many applications and I believe my business plan indicated I was going to do 180 over a 3-month period of time, which is, not crazy numbers, but it was significant.
Yeah.
And I had my review this one day, and keep in mind, we've only been here 3 months. I didn't know a lot of people. And before that review came, what was really going on in my life, and again, something we didn't talk about at the time, but my son had come up here. He went back into a treatment center and quickly thereafter was arrested for heroin charges and put in jail. And my daughter was struggling with an eating disorder at that time. And my wife was about to have a nervous breakdown. And here I had this new business that I was supposed to be producing a certain number, a certain level of production. And I remember my boss at the time came in and sat down, and I was so excited because I thought this is one good thing. I'm only 4 applications away from that quota of 180. It was a 176. And he started asking me, hey, where are those additional 4 applications? And I don't know about you, Rena, but have you ever been at a moment in your life where you just snap?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have.
I think the mask that Jim Shambo had seen for so long, and that people saw, it started to come off in a big way that day, and I lost it. I literally lost it. I don't get angry often, and I stood up and cursed at that boss and asked him to leave the office with a bunch of expletive words, and he left. But I realized at that moment he knew nothing about me.
Yeah.
He didn't know who I was. He didn't know what I was going through. And just like I see behind you a picture of your family behind you, there was one behind me as well.
Yeah.
And he never asked about that. And I think given where I was at in that moment, I just snapped.
Yeah.
And I remember walking out of my office and realizing I've probably just lost my job because of the way I spoke to him. Mm-hmm. And I got in my car. And I remember this was on Sugarloaf Parkway. And I began weeping. Just destroyed.
Yeah.
And if I had to tell you what that felt like, it felt like the mask was just melting off quickly. Yeah. And I remember being so upset, I pulled over to the side of the road because I couldn't drive any longer. And I started what I thought would be bargaining with God, screaming at him, yelling at him, cursing at him, and basically just telling him, you've taken everything from me. I lost my childhood. I've lost my son. My daughter is struggling. My wife is struggling. I can't do this anymore. I really didn't know anybody up here except for my brother. And felt super alone. And over a period of about 20 minutes, it was the first time in my life ever that I heard an audible voice. And I felt I heard God say this. And I'm going to use this term Jimmy because that's what my dad calls me. He said, Jimmy, all I want is you. And that was a pivotal moment for me. Because it made me realize that the control that I had been hanging on to for so long, that there was something out there beyond me. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance that God could love me. Because I've been fighting that for so long. And so that moment in my life really changed me. Yeah. And it was like I was willing to give God a shot, right? Like I'm not all in at all.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to give him a shot. And of course, the very first thing I had to do was apologize to my boss and call him. Trying to get that taken care of. Yeah. And the funny thing is that how God works is that today I have the same position that he had at that pivotal moment in my life. And there was a reason for that, right? I mean, there was a reason for that. So I remember going home that day and just, we all have a battlefield, and the battlefield's in our mind. Mm-hmm. It's between the two ears, and really struggling. And I decided to open my Bible. And this verse has become my very favorite verse in the whole wide world, but it's Exodus 14:14. And it says, I will fight for you. You need only be still. Mm. And there's so much more to that. It was like saying, hey, Jim, you need to just chill out. Yeah. It's not yours, it's mine. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm willing to give it a shot. So fast forward a few weeks later, my son was accepted and No Longer Bound. Yeah. And he went to No Longer Bound. My daughter got better, and she's fantastic now. Mm. But oftentimes it happens in the family because she was the kid who was always okay, right? And so our focus was on somebody different. Mm-hmm. And it's not that we didn't love her any less. In fact, loved her just as much. It's just that we thought, oh, she's okay. But come to find out, that was the one thing that she could control, was the eating disorder piece. So she got better, and my son went to No Longer Bound. And again, that was probably 9-10 years ago. During the time he was there, I remember I got a chance to go to family recovery and sit in the back, and it was very kind of angry still, I guess, because like this is not my problem. This is his problem, and quickly went through that process. And then after that, I got a call from No Longer Bound, and they said, hey, we're having this class. And it's called Inner Healing, and now we call it Revelation. And we're going to do it for outside men. And I said, well, that's really cool. Maybe I'd love to do that just to see what my son's getting ready to go through, because that might be good, And so I decided to do that. I had no idea what that was about. I had no idea how deep and how incredibly satisfying that was to not just know God, but experience him on a level that I had never done before. Mm. And I finally got to deal with the pain of everything. I mean, everything. And so it's interesting because, you and I have both seen all these amazing stories that No Longer Bound. And they come out and say, I am no longer bound, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, who would have thought that by my son going there, that I was the one who got healed, which was just really crazy. And so I went through that process, and the first time in my life ever that I felt clean, like where I really got to experience God in a way that was just powerful. And I got to witness God giving me a white robe to cover that little boy that was so hurt and so down, and make me feel clean again. And that was the first time ever. And so that was just kind of the beginning of this whole deal, and understanding that I have no control. Mm-mm. None. Yeah. I'm the kind of guy, like, I like to, we think we're in control, right? And I'm like, okay, God, I'm going to give you about 72 hours. After that, I'm going to have to step in. Yeah.
Got to make this happen.
Yeah. And then that never did work. But I know that this process has really been one that has just shown me that God does love you. You know, God loves me more than, and that's been so powerful. And this whole thing called grace and all the legalism that I learned growing up and how afraid I was of God.
Yeah.
And to think that, you know, if I did this, and this, it's all contingent. And so, you know, I'm screwed. There's no way this can't happen.
Yeah.
And so I really feel like that No Longer Bound really changed my life. And, you know, looking back, maybe 12 years, 11 years ago before we moved here, if someone would have told me that I'd be leaving real estate and I'd be in Georgia working for an insurance company and all this stuff would have happened, I would have told you, you're out of your mind. Yeah. You know, and it's just so amazing that, you know, how God works and you just have no clue what's getting ready to happen.
His ways are just, I mean, you can't predict them ever, ever.
No.
And the path is, for most of us, it's so windy and often so much longer than we think it's going to be.
It's true.
God's time is always like, so much further in the future than we anticipate.
You can't see around it. You know, you're just not sure what's going to happen. And, but I mean, you know, speaking my truth at this point and talking about those kind of things, it's been amazing to me to see how many other men will come up and share those things and say, hey, this happened to me.
Yeah.
Or this happened to me. And so I think that that's been a really great thing.
So why do you feel the time is right for you to kind of start sharing your story and taking off the mask?
Great question. I think that at this point in my life, I'm not afraid anymore. And I think that so many times fear is such a wall. And I'm just tired of it. Yeah. I think there's no place for it any longer. And I'm not afraid to say that, you know, hey, this is who I am. And this is what's happened to me. And God loves me regardless. In fact, I feel that God loves me even more when I'm sharing these things because I know that it's all for his glory. You know, I mean, there's something freeing about that. And I think that, you know, he came to set us free. And one of my favorite things is when, I don't know who said this, and I'm sure, you know, I'm not sure who it was, but someone said to me once that God treated you as if his son had lived your life so that you in turn could live his.
Say that again.
So let's say that again. Yeah. So God treated his son as if he had lived your life so that you in turn could live his. An exchanged life. Yeah. Right? So he put his son on a cross. And we oftentimes feel that way. Yeah. But we don't have to, because he says that's not who you are. Yeah. That you're special, that you're righteous, that you're perfect, and that you're my son or you're my daughter. And there's just so much more to that. And again, when you talk about things like this, it's hard for the enemy to get in our head.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's the only thing he's got is what's between our ears.
So true.
And it's just a minefield. And I think that oftentimes if we're not talking about that and we're not authentic and we're not real, it's going to play with your head. Yeah. And you're going to end up in a place that you don't want to be. And as Christian people, I think that the message constantly needs to be, God loves you regardless, you know? And have you ever heard of the acronym CHAIN that Stephen Furtick had used? So, you know, how you become addicted to something is you make a choice, which becomes a habit, which becomes automatic, which becomes your identity, and it becomes your nature. CHAIN. And I love that. Yeah. Because a period of time, he did an analogy on stage one time, and it was like where he used a chain, and he talked about that. But then he took a bigger chain, and he attached that same chain to this person. And he said, this chain is called grace. And that's not going to let you go, no matter what you do. And it's much stronger than this whole thing that you've got yourself into. And we just need to recognize that. And so That's really the reason
need to
why
look that up
I'm
and watch
doing that.
That's
It's really the reason I've decided that this is, and it doesn't hurt either that the older I get, my filter goes away.
That's so good. Well, and I love to have these conversations, and it's like we always kind of gravitate to faith. And for my non-believing listeners or friends, people just don't that are separated from God. That the path to Him sometimes I think seems so distant, but it's really not. I mean, He's right there with us all the time. And it's not about going to church and following a list of rules and giving up, whatever you love. It's about relationship.
Absolutely.
And it's the power of that relationship is it's transformational. It can fill your heart in ways you can't even explain. So I just thank you for being so transparent and sharing that you found God at a men's addiction recovery center in a room with what?
Right. Who would have thought?
5 other men, he was there.
Yeah. Well, what was more important to me than anything is to realize that He always was there. Right. Even as far back as I can remember, I was still there. I mean, I was present. Even at the age of 50, I was present and I was sitting there, and God had been there all the way through. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been there to start with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I had to kind of realize that God gives us free will. And the man that did this to me years ago, he had the free will to do whatever he wanted, but God was right there with me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it through. Right. So that was an important thing for me to realize also.
Yeah. So powerful. So good. So I love, No Longer Bound obviously had a huge impact on your life, and you have stayed connected and involved, and you're on the board and you're teaching family recovery classes. And, I just love the fact that it was Tyler who ended up there first, but you're the one who is just really fully implanted and have just given back of yourself and experienced such healing in the process. And not only for you, but it's eventually covered your whole family, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, there's, it's still a process. I think that Tyler's been clean, I want to say, for about 1.5 years or so, which is just a blessing.
Amazing.
Amazing blessing.
He is a great guy.
Starting to have a, great relationship. And I know he's got a heart, that he really cares. So, I mean, and, just the relationship I have with my dad now is just so amazing. And I talk to him all the time, and he's just incredibly supportive. My mom is too. And while they've gotten older, it's neat to see the wisdom that they have. And they're willing to impart those things to me. Yeah. And it's just such a great thing to be able to call them and share. And like the first thing they always say is, let's just pray about it. Let's just pray about that. And it even goes back to my grandmother, who was my father's mother. She was a prayer warrior, and she was deaf, and she was kind of the strong arm of the family in terms of faith. And her husband died due to complications of addiction as well. So, I mean, it's been in the family for quite a while.
It's in mine as well.
And part of the idea of us doing even this is just to say, I'm going to stop this generational thing, right? And we're going to move forward. Right. And
we're going to talk about it.
Exactly.
We're not going to hide behind it anymore.
Right.
There's been so much shame about it for so long that I really feel these types of conversations also help break down that stigma. Correct. It's okay to talk about it.
And you need to.
And you bring it to the light, and it's, you connect with other people, and it just doing that, it starts to get better.
Right. And that's why I'm so passionate about helping families, because they become just as sick as the addict.
Oh, yeah.
And, even though over the past 10 years, we've continued to struggle on and off, and Tyler's continued to struggle, we're not that perfect family, right?
No.
And I remember there was a time a few years in at No Longer Bound teaching, I thought, I think I probably need to step down because Tyler's not doing great and we're not doing good as a family. Who am I to be standing up here and sharing these stories or talking about how you can heal when I haven't done it? But I remember, hearing from God and praying about it, and like, that's exactly where you need to be.
Yeah.
And it helped me a lot to kind of move forward. And there's just so many people struggling, and it's just such an epidemic, and it's good to be around people that can understand.
Yeah.
And
people that are real. Everybody's had their mask melted off in that room, in those rooms. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was shocked when I got there, just the level of transparency and realness. And I mean, I just gravitated to it so much. And
it's not something you see often, especially with men, which is really a shame.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. I mean, it takes courage.
Sure it does.
Especially from what the world has taught us to not to feel and not to cry.
Yeah.
And to be able to go in there and be that vulnerable and authentic, and to know even after you've done it, God's got your back. Mm-hmm. It's an incredible feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And just being there, I've learned, I was on the marketing side, not the clinical side, but just in hearing these stories, it seems like absentee fathers, that's a lot of the story for a lot of these men. Did your career ever threaten to kind of consume your life so that you weren't a fully present dad for your kids?
Absolutely. I think, when my son in his teenage years had the big job and made all this money, and I always thought if I could just pay for things, it'd be easier because I didn't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to face those things, and I didn't want to, there was such a stigma. And any family that goes through addiction realizes that there's this point in time where you think, I don't know if I can share this with anybody, and maybe no one else is experiencing this. And the reality is everybody is, but you kind of internalize that. And the thought of your child, struggling as a heroin addict is terrifying. Yeah. And also it's very opposite of what we're taught to do as parents, to detach, and what that actually looks like, and detach with love. And so what are you saying? I mean, is that like, it's just not
so hard,
not the norm.
Can't imagine.
So it becomes very frustrating. And I think that every family struggling with addiction has their own journey, and they have to determine at some point in time what it is they want to do. Because, I've been told, listen, you can never let them live with you, or you can never do this, or don't do this. But everybody has to experience that on their own, right? Because there's a point in time where you have to decide, you have to be okay whether you get that phone call or not. Like, you have to get to that place where you're going to be okay whether you get the phone call or not. And that's when you can start to have some freedom in making the right decisions to do that. But until you're there, nobody can tell you what you should or shouldn't do.
And I'm sure your wife, as women, with us being usually the nurturers in the family, I'm guessing it probably took her longer to get there than it did you.
I don't know. It's a great question. I think that we both may have got there, but maybe I wasn't willing to show that yet or get there. And I think that's the ultimate goal for the families that I teach, is to make sure they're okay, whether their loved one is okay or not. And it's really hard sometimes to be able to trust God to know that the answer that you want and the recovery that you want may not be the answer you're going to get. And it's a lot in that.
That is a lot.
It's a good bit of surrender that really makes a difference.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of,
yes,
I've heard you say some of us would rather fight to stay sick than surrender to be healed.
It's a great statement.
What? Can you
wasn't for me,
unpack
by the way. Just so you know.
But it's good. Some of us would rather fight to stay sick than surrender to be healed.
Because what's involved in surrender is pain. And unless we're willing to face the pain, we're not going to heal. And so we oftentimes fight to keep the mask on because we realize what's going to happen is when you start to rip that off, it's not going to feel good. Yeah. And I think that's the meaning behind that, for me at least, is just to know that any time that I've had to gain healing, it's through surrender, and surrender means I've got to deal with that thing, whatever that thing is. And sometimes it's not fun.
Yeah.
It's not normal, honestly, for somebody to go backwards in a class like at No Longer Bound for 5 months or several weeks in a row and dig into stuff and trauma and all the stuff that's happened. That's just not normal.
No.
But when you realize that the reason that you do that is so you can get that healing, and so you can allow to allow God to see that he was there the whole time and that he was a part of it and that you're going to be okay. Yeah. It's incredibly freeing.
Yeah. Surrender is not, especially for like driven people, it almost feels like you're giving up, right. For like driven, accomplished, high-performing people to surrender. It's like, no, I'm going to fight to the end. But
yeah, for most people, it's the white flag, right? You wave the white flag on all of us, and that's what surrender means. And it just means allowing someone else to take care of it. Yeah. And trusting that God can, and understanding too that it doesn't always look the way we want it to look. Mm-hmm. And there, that can be scary at times.
Yeah. That's so good. So I love to talk about dads and their very important role in the family. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try not to cry on this because it's so sweet. On Father's Day on your Facebook page, you wrote, "I so appreciate the relationship I have with my father. He has been an amazing example of what it looks like to have weathered the storm, fought for his family, loved unconditionally, and kept Christ the foundation of his life. Having led family recovery classes for so many years, I'm sure you have tremendous insight into what it means to be a real and present father. Help us understand just how important that is."
Well, I think that especially for men, fathers are one of the most important things there are. And a lot of times they don't have the ability to have those relationships. And oftentimes we see when people come through recovery that reconciliation is not a guarantee, right? And there's been a lot of damage and there's a lot of hurt. But I think with fathers, there's just this thing that's there, this innate ability to want to be loved by your dad. Mm-hmm. And I think that I am so blessed to be able to have that relationship with my father. And more importantly, for him to have set an example, because he wasn't perfect, and my dad has been through struggles himself. He's so loved, and it's so amazing to me when I'm around him to see the amount of people that just love him. And how many people's lives that he's impacted over the years by sharing his story. And so I think that's really important. But more importantly than any of that, when you have a dad who loves God, like my dad does, there's nothing more foundational. There's nothing more than that example that provides, especially for someone growing up. And I recognize that, I was not the perfect dad either, but I strive to be like my dad and provide help to other people. And I'm so thankful that he gave me that gene, because I really do believe that came from my father. But to also understand that we have a heavenly Father too, that wants to be our dad and can provide the same thing. And I think that's what so many people, while they might not have the same relationship they have with their father, like I am blessed to have with mine, there is a father and there is a dad that cares just as much for them, that they can rely on, that they can look to for an example, and that can provide a foundation for them to get them through whatever storm it may be.
Amen. So good. And what a gift to have an earthly father well into your adult life.
Oh, it's a blessing. Really
my dad's been gone for a long time, and I just miss his presence in a lot of ways, and have a father who loves Jesus. I mean, I didn't have that, and I think that's why I really gravitated to Bobby, my husband, like I did, because on our first date, it became apparent he loved Jesus. And I knew that was a big thing missing in my father. So for you to have both, that
it's awesome.
Amazing. And that's how God works. It's like he helps, you went through all this trauma with your kids as a parent, but you had your parents here to nurture and love you and guide you through it. You know, he's always helping to fill in the gaps when those are present, because they're always going to be present. I mean, nobody has that perfect family unit.
And if it were, we wouldn't need Christ.
There
right?
you go.
I mean, it's just
there you go.
That would be a point, right? So
yeah,
I think that he's always trying to find ways for us to kind of turn and say, I'm here.
Okay. So now I'm going to make you really cry.
Okay.
So, your son, Tyler, he goes by
Yes.
Ty now, I guess.
Right.
Is that? He wrote a post on Facebook, and I'm friends with him, that when I read it, I wept. And I couldn't imagine how it made you feel. So if you don't mind, I would love you to read that post that your son Ty wrote about you after you accomplished some test or some.
Yeah, I had passed a test, and congratulations, Dad. You worked your butt off, and I got to see you do it. The even cooler part for a son was to watch you achieve it, not based on just how intelligent you are or how much you deserve it, but because you earned every bit of it. Be proud today, not just because your family is, but because you're a man worth being proud of. I love you, Dad. Thank you for all you've done for this family, and me, even more important, never giving up, no matter the challenge. I know you're not a fan of cussing, but thanks for always being a badass. Love your son, Ty. Yeah, that was powerful. That was an incredible moment, and I cherish those. He was, we're always building our relationship, and I'm so proud of him for, the struggle that he's gone through. And I recognize how difficult it is. And just 2 years ago was the last time that, he overdosed, and his heart stopped 4 times. Oh my gosh. And I just feel so blessed that he's still here. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt in my mind, no matter what his journey is, that, God's not done with him yet.
No way.
He's not done with me yet. And he's not done with you yet.
No.
And so what's great about that is that the story is still being written. But certainly that statement did mean a lot. When I read that statement, I lost it. It wrecked me simply because I don't get to hear that stuff that often from him. And both him and my daughter have just been through a tremendous amount. And I want to make sure that they hear that I love them more than anything. So
being a parent, a lot of times it is a thankless job, especially when you're kind of in the trenches with your kids. They just don't have good perspective about their parents and what kind of sacrifices we make for them. So for him to publicly just articulate that like that, I just thought it was like, wow.
Yeah, it was an incredible moment. And I relish those kind of moments, I think. And it's great to know that both my kids are okay now, and they both got children, and it's God's really working. And I don't know, he's not done yet, but I'm excited where it's going, and I'm excited to just see for myself what God has in store, because it's just been an amazing ride the past 10 years.
So would you say the mask is fully off?
I'd have to say I think a lot of times in my life, there may be some shrapnel still that I may have not dealt with. And oftentimes now that I teach that very same class, the Revelation class or Inner Healing, I've done it 4 times now. God speaks to me again. And so I still learn more, and I'm so happy that that's the case. Emotionally, it can be draining at times, but the freedom on the other side of that is just incredible. And as much as I hate to go through pain, and I think we all do, knowing what's on the other side and understanding that now, it gives me an incredible opportunity to not only continue to work on myself, but to work with those families through No Longer Bound.
Yeah. Fight for them.
Absolutely. Because they deserve to be fought for.
Absolutely. So the term relevate means to inspire or uplift.
Mm-hmm.
What words of inspiration do you have for our listeners as it relates to living a life unmasked?
I would say this, God's love is so powerful. And I think we have the opportunity to experience that. And it just takes one step. Mm-hmm. It's just taking that first step and realizing, maybe things aren't working out. No matter what I've been through, no matter what you've been through, that there's always a way out. And even people who think there is no God, if you've never tried it, you're never going to know, right? And I think that sometimes you get to the end of your rope and you realize that maybe there is a shot. And I think that if you just give God one opportunity, mm-hmm. He will fight for you. Yeah. And being still doesn't mean doing nothing. No. It just means resting in His presence, right. And allowing Him maybe just to sit on His lap and allow Him to love you.
So beautiful. Jim, I'm just blown away and so thankful for this time to be with you and to have you really share your heart and bless a whole bunch of people in the process.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. You be blessed.
Thanks, you too.
The level of vulnerability in this man, Jim Shambo, is just extraordinary, don't you think? May we all be inspired by his example to take off the mask, to love our family recklessly and completely the way the Father loves us, to never stop fighting, especially for your kids, to give back, to be humble, to love, and to serve. Let's go, people. A real, abundant life awaits. Take off that mask. Don't be afraid to address the hurt that's holding you back so you can truly live. I'm Rena Olson, and this is Relevate.